Hi guys, this is some guidance on your 40 mark question from your SY2 exam. So again, a lot of the things that I'm talking about you can transfer into your SY1 exam that you're going to have next week. The key thing really that most people are missing out on is the links to the question. So they're superficially putting them in, but they're not really explaining them in full detail. And again, this is another example of somebody who's obviously revised, done a pretty good answer, but underachieved because they haven't explained themselves properly. So if you remember, this one was about ethnicity and educational achievement. So they've been, and it's also obviously also outside school factors. So this person's done the right thing by talking about Bourdieu, who talks about cultural capital, and basically says here that ethnic minorities have less cultural capital, less likely to achieve. But they haven't said why ethnic minorities are less likely to have cultural capital. So this will be something along the lines of ethnic minorities have less cultural capital because of the fact that they might have been socialised into a culture which is not similar to the dominant culture of the UK. So you need to say why. And what I mean by not socialised into the dominant culture of the UK, if you've got a family that were brought up in Jamaica and the norms and values that you need in order to achieve an education are very, very different to that in the UK, then you're not going to be socialised into the values which are going to be useful for the education system. So things like speaking appropriately, saying please and thank you. I mean, as we've already talked about before, in some cultures, saying please and thank you as much as we do is kind of seen as not necessary. Whereas in the UK, we deem it as very, very important. So you might not get on with your teachers because of it. You might not get as much extra help. And so all of these things can impact your educational achievement. But a lot of people haven't said why ethnic minorities have less cultural capital. So that's something that you need to make sure you do. This person has done a good job in saying that this means that they don't have the suitable norms and values or skills to help them succeed. So they've made the link in terms of educational achievement all through here, but they haven't made the link between cultural capital and ethnic minorities. So that's the key link that was missing. They've then gone on to say that Bernstein supports it, which is good. Because if you've got an elaborated language code, then you're more likely to achieve. And if you've got a restricted language code, you're less likely to achieve. But they haven't, again, said why ethnic minorities have a restricted language code. So you need to make sure that you say something like, ethnic minorities might have grown up in a culture whereby their language is different, again linking to the please and thank you. Also, slang might be more socially acceptable in some cultures, and it's not just in certain cultures, it's in certain households. So if you grew up in a family where English isn't your first language, then your vocabulary isn't going to be as wide. So even if even if the students' first language is English, if your parents aren't, your vocabulary won't be as good because you pick up on the vocabulary that's spoke about in your home. So you need to make sure that you make that link between ethnic minorities and not having the restricted language code, not having cultural capital, and then make the additional link to educational achievement. So other things that needed some work were the counter-arguments. So this is quite a good example. So theorists that disagree with this believe that educational achievement of ethnic minorities is affected by in-school factors. So that's exactly what you need to be doing. You need to be comparing the outside of school factors to the inside of school factors. And the obvious one is interactionism. And Gilborn's also another good example. So they've said that teachers negatively label black students, which causes them to live up to labels and rebel. This therefore means that educational achievement is negatively impacted by labelling. Rosenthal and Jacobson support this because they say that if someone is labelled, they'll live up to their label. This is known as the self-fulfilling prophecy. All very, very good. So then they've said, however, this theory is criticised by Fuller, who said that Afro-Caribbean girls in London resisted their negative labels and achieved. Therefore, although there is lots of evidence to suggest that negative labelling will affect the achievement of ethnic minorities, there are some people who will not see this as a problem and achieve regardless. However, the question was outside of school factors. But what they haven't done here is linked to the question. So they've done a brilliant set of answers about interactionist, labelling, self-fulfilling prophecy, Rosenthal, Jacobson, Gilborn. But what they haven't done is said, therefore, this theory is more significant in explaining why ethnic minorities fail in educational achievement than outside of school factors because. So you've got to draw a comparison. You've got to say, this theory is better or worse than previous theories. So that's really what we're looking for when we're talking about evaluation. All this kind of stuff here where we've said sort of Fuller said that girls resist their labels and all this kind of stuff, that's fine. Although what you really need to be doing in your evaluation is saying, therefore, this theory is better or worse than the previous theories we've looked at. And a lot of people lost out on marks because of this, because what you get is juxtaposition marks, which basically means, let me just have a look, that you get stuck in the second mark band, which means that you lose at least 9 marks from this question, which is 10% of your overall marks. So that means anybody who could have got an A has instantly gone down to a B, just because they haven't drawn a comparison between the inside school factors and the outside school factors. So you need to say this theory is better or worse than other theories because. So to some extent, this evaluation is not as necessary as talking about which theory is better or worse than the other. Okay, and finally, this is another example of kind of a typical thing that people did. So, as it says here, finally, a theorist called Strand suggested that ethnic minorities are more likely to suffer from material deprivation. So here, it would be good to say material deprivation is an outside school factor. And that then shows that you're still sort of focused on the question. So they've said this means that ethnic minorities' lack of money could be a factor that negatively impacts their achievement. This is supported by Driver and Ballard, who say that ethnic minorities are more likely to be single-parent families and therefore suffer from material deprivation. Again, why? Why is it that when you're from a single-parent family, you're more likely to suffer from material deprivation? And again, a lot of people messed up on this one because you talked about free school meals. Obviously, it's not in this bit, but Strand did talk about free school meals. And a lot of people didn't say what free school meals represents. And what free school meals represents is the fact that you're poor. The reason you get free school meals is because you don't have very much money. So regardless of the fact that you're getting fed each day, what this represents is that you're poor and that you're going to end up suffering from material deprivation. So yes, you can afford to have a meal each day, but you probably can't afford school trips. You probably can't afford educational resources. You probably can't afford a nice uniform, so you might get bullied. So when you're talking about material deprivation, you need to make sure that you say why certain groups are more likely to get free school meals. Oh, sorry, they have talked about free school meals. Why certain groups are more likely to get free school meals and why some groups aren't. But then you also need to show what free school meals represent. And that's the fact that you're more likely to be poor and then suffer from material deprivation. So I know this is your first timed exam, but in your 30-mark question in your youth paper that you're going to do next week, you need to make sure that you remember all these things, that you explain yourself. So it's almost the P-E-E-R-E-R. Actually, the strangest thing that people are missing out on is this bit. So the explanation of the theory and the referral to the question. That's what people are missing out on. If you run out of time, what I would suggest you do is you do fewer paragraphs, or what you could do is when you're doing your counter argument, so when, for example, in this question you're talking about inside of school factors, you leave out the evaluation. You just literally refer back to the question. And with your referral back, what you'll end up doing is you'll end up talking in terms of that comparison that I was talking about on the previous slide. So please ask me if you've got any questions.
Made with Doodlecast Pro.